What we're going to do today is cover off our MxAPS solution. And this is Mark here, and I will be taking you through a little presentation and a little demo of the software. So we're going to go through a quick PowerPoint, hopefully, do the demo, and then cover off sort of what you can expect from pricing and those sorts of things. So if you don't know who InsightWorks are, we've been around for almost 10 years now, and we work primarily in manufacturing and distribution. Now, the MxAPS product you're looking at, is actually predates InsightWorks. A core group of the InsightWorks people actually developed the previous version almost 20 years ago. So it's been around for quite a while and used in a lot of larger companies and smaller companies as well. So even though we've really only been selling it in the Nav and Business Central world for 7 or 8 years now, it actually has a pretty good history. All right, we're based in Canada, but we do work globally. We have offices in the US and Europe, but we do work through our partners. So for the partners on there, if you're signed up as a reseller, you're on the website, and if you're a customer, go to our website, see if your existing partner is one of our resellers, and then they can help you out with quotes and things like that, or you can contact us directly if they're not. All right, with that, a little bit about what we do. So these are all the solutions. Obviously, today we're focused on the MxAPS, but we have a whole bunch of other solutions. You can go to the website and check out. There's recorded videos on all of these things, tons of information. One I will mention, or maybe a couple, is Shop Floor Insight. Because when we're dealing with scheduling tools like MxAPS, you do need sort of timely information back from the shop floor. And that's what something like Shop Floor Insight will give you. It'll record what people are actually doing, what they've completed on the shop floor, so that the next time we run the schedule, we know exactly what's happening and what's going on in the shop. We also have this enhanced planning worksheet for Business Central that hasn't been officially released yet, but that also helps with your MRP and your planning and your forecasting and things like that. So keep an eye out for webinars coming up on this in the future. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff. You'll get alerts. Anyway, the other thing I'll mention down here at the bottom, these are all the free apps for Business Central Cloud. So if you're on the cloud version, you can get all of these free. You go to AppSource, you install them, you run them, and you're good to go. So I'm not going to get into these too much, but WMS Express is a free warehouse management solution. Grab that guy, go ahead. Graphical Scheduler, we'll look at a little bit today. We've got a bunch of printing stuff, barcode, and document drag and drop available as well. So again, you can go to AppSource, no registration or anything, just install those suckers and get to work. Now, what we want to focus on today is MxAPS, and you're probably thinking, what the heck is MxAPS? And what it is really finite capacity scheduling, and we call it advanced finite capacity scheduling because it does a lot more than a simple finite capacity scheduler. And then you're saying, well, what the heck is that? Well, what it does is it goes out and it generates the schedule for you for the shop floor, an executable schedule, and that's a key word. The schedule it generates, you should be able to take out to the shop floor and run against. It's not going to be some random thing that gives you a rough order of go or anything like that. It's going to give you a schedule you can actually work towards. And what that ultimately does is turn scheduling into that repeatable process that we need, right? Something that we don't need that human intervention. In short, we want to get rid of Gantt charts, right? We want to get rid of people using our graphical scheduler as an example. We don't want people to have to look at a schedule and drag and drop things and all that kind of stuff. That we don't want that. We want people to be able to run the schedule, have confidence that it's going to work, and just push it out to the shop floor. And I'll give you an example of that. One of our customers is Freightliner, and they've got $1 billion plant. They put $1 billion worth of parts through that plant. Can you imagine what it would take if they had to schedule that thing manually? Instead, what they do is they run a schedule for the morning shift, they run a schedule for the afternoon shift. It's all automated, and it pushes it out, and away they go. Now, you don't have to be $1 billion company to take advantage of that, right? Like, you can be a very small company. Production planners are very special people, and I mean that in a good way. They're hard to find. They know what they're doing, all that kind of stuff, but that means you're heavily reliant on that individual. If they take vacation or if they have to quarantine or anything goes wrong, you're in trouble. It's hard to get those people. It's hard to train them. Turning it into a systemized process where you hit a button and you get a schedule is really what you want. Okay. All right. Now, how do we actually make that happen? Well, that all sounds good. So what features does the system have to allow that? Well, again, the finite capacity forward scheduling. So what that does is really, unlike Business Central, which by default backwards schedules everything from the due date and will happily schedule stuff in the past for you and all that kind of stuff. MX doesn't do that. It takes whatever starting date and schedules forward from that date based on the capacity that you have available within your facility. Another good one that's a real big gap in Nav and Business Central is, automatic machine center selection. Right, I got a work center with 10 CNC machines, or I got 20 welders out there. I don't want to have to manually choose which, lathe gets the work or which welder gets the work or anything like that. I just want to say, schedule it on this work center and let the system choose the best machine to run that particular item on, right? So it does that. And then if it can't find, a preferred machine to run it on, we've got this machine alternates thing, which allows it to go out and choose maybe a non-preferred machine, something that can still work, but maybe isn't as good as the preferred machine, but would be the right choice in order to fulfill the schedule. And that can also be used for subcontracting as well. So it can intelligently choose when to subcontract parts if you need to. The scheduling rules I'll get into in the demo here. The order sequencing, so we can sequence things like light to dark or cold to hot, then back to cold, those types of things. So we can do all that sequencing of product. This one at the bottom here is another important one. If you're a high volume manufacturer, and I've got an order for 20,000 parts, I may not want to run one order of 20,000 parts on a machine. I might want to split that up across multiple machines or multiple days or whatever I want to do. So it does have the ability to say, okay, yeah, that order for 20,000, do that in 10 lots, or do 100 items at a time, and it'll automatically split that out into 20 lots or whatever it happens to be, or 200 lots. So it'll do that work for you, and then can schedule those lots on different equipment if required, or different days, or whatever you want. Even maybe inject another order in the middle of that, all sorts of things it can do that. All right, some more stuff, because that's not all. So the net change rescheduling, or sort of parameter-based rescheduling, allows us to do things like if there's equipment downtime, right? You log a failure on equipment, and we can schedule around that. So you don't really change anything that's there. We just schedule around that downed piece of equipment. And of course, we can do preventative maintenance scheduling. So if you've got a piece of equipment that's going down in 2 weeks because you're doing some PM on it, we can handle that and we can schedule around that. In fact, if you want to get fancy, we can also do predictive equipment maintenance scheduling, because based on that schedule, I can tell you exactly, hey, in 3 weeks, that machine is going to hit 1,000 hours and we're going to need to do some maintenance on it. Right, next month it's hardly going to run at all, so we don't need to do maintenance for 2 months. So we can actually tell you in advance how much your equipment is going to run, and you can start doing predictive maintenance on those things instead of just periodic maintenance, whether the thing needs it or not. Anyway, that's fancy stuff you can get into if you really want. We can also model any facility out there, right? So it doesn't matter what your manufacturing process looks like. We can model that within the system. So we can do things like, operation delays, overlapping operations, all sorts of stuff to really model how you manufacture products. Non-production scheduling, the default right now in Business Central at any rate is production orders, but we can schedule really anything you want. If you want to create an extension in Business Central, or if you're running the on-prem version, it's just some data manipulation, we can schedule anything you like. And one good example of that is like receiving and shipping. We actually had a customer, part of the Magna Group, so massive automotive organization, and they reduced their inventory levels by some ridiculous amount. I think it was like 80% or whatever. I'll have to look up the case study on it. But the way they were able to do that is they knew exactly when they were going to run a specific product, and they knew their component requirements. So they would actually schedule their loading bays. They have 10 loading bays. They could schedule exactly. They knew when those loading bays would be available. They'd schedule the trucks in, and they'd bring in the raw materials for their production just in time, right? So in automotive, just in time is a big deal. And they were able to actually reduce their inventory dramatically by being able to schedule their receiving and shipping because they have limited shipping bays and things like that. Anyway, you can do stuff like that if you want. Multi-segment setup production, I'll talk about that in the demo, but that's for stuff like in Business Central you have one setup thing, right? You can say, oh, it takes me an hour to set this up. But what if your setup is a multi-part setup? I'm doing maybe I'm injection molding, and so as part of the setup, I'm going to change the mold and I'm going to change the color. Well, the mold is maybe 2 hours to change, and the color is maybe half an hour to change. So what we can do is if we group those similar items together, we can eliminate that mold changeover. So we eliminate that 2-hour changeover all the time, and we only have to deal with the color changeover, right? And then we can use the sequencing I talked about on the last slide for sequencing the colors, so we can go from light to dark, so we don't have to do massive changeovers when we change colors. And then finally, the advanced constraints, and what that is it allows us to constrain on secondary resources, and that's things like material. Do I have enough raw material or components to perform this activity? Do I have enough staff, right? I might have those 10 machine centers I talked about, but I've only got one operator for whatever reason, so I can't run 10 jobs maybe at the same time. I can only run a portion of those, so we can constrain by labor or tooling, right? If I have 2 production orders that need the same tooling, we can figure that out. And anything you want to throw at it, right? You don't want to run a specific job until the electricity price is a certain point. Doesn't matter what those constraints are, we can do any of that. So you can throw any constraints you want at the system. All right. So now, I talked about on-prem there a little bit. So the availability of this, what we're going to do today is go through and look at the cloud-based version of the system built into Business Central. That will be on AppSource in June. And then this advanced constraints that I just talked about, where we can throw anything like labor, material, all that, will be available as a second release, probably early August. If you do the standalone application, which is what we sell today for Nav and Business Central, that you can get all the capabilities. You can do anything you want in the current standalone app. The cloud-based one, we just have to add the user interface components and everything else to do the advanced constraints. So again, that'll be a couple months away, and it'll be on par with almost everything we can do in the standalone. All right, so that's the availability. Now, a little bit on the history. I talked about some of these guys before. We've got a lot of customers, bigger ones, smaller ones. Some of these aren't on there anymore, like this Universal Music is always amusing. They used to do something ridiculous like, a million music CDs every month. So you know why they're no longer around, because who buys CDs anymore? So a whole bunch of these. But what's interesting about some of these guys, I don't see Rolls-Royce on here, but anyway, some of these moved off because they upgraded their ERP system, and SAP came in there and said, just have an integrated solution. Don't use the standalone thing, even though it's better than what we're offering. Don't use that because, we have an integrated solution. Well, that's kind of ironic, because that's actually what you're going to do. You're going to go out to people that are maybe doing, custom planning solutions, or they got something standalone or whatever, and you're going to say, don't use that. Buy Business Central, because it can do that scheduling for you. So instead of buying Business Central and then going out and figuring out how you schedule, you're actually buying Business Central because of the scheduling capability. Okay. So anyway, there's a bunch of guys on here. We do, we've done tons of different industries, tons of different customers. We've got a great range of capabilities within the solution. All right, enough of that. Let's actually jump in and see what this thing looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a little bit of overview of kind of how we've set this thing up. So the first thing is, if we look at the items that we're going to be scheduling, and we've got a couple here that we're scheduling, but what I'm going to do is just show you one of them. So we're actually building these battery boxes. So we're not building bikes today. I know that's sad for many of you that love building bikes, but we're going to build these battery boxes. So we've got a stainless steel one here, and we've got an aluminum one here, right? So 2 different sort of variations of this. You can use variants and things like that if you want, but these 2 different items. And if we have a look at what this thing looks like, I'll go in here, and this is the structure, so the subcomponents and everything else. And a couple of things to point out here. You'll notice that everything is scheduled at the work center level, right? So if we go down here, we've got welding is scheduled at the work center. Well, I've got more than one person at welding, or laser cutters, right? So I'm scheduling at the laser cutting work center. I've got multiple laser cutters that this thing could run on. I don't have to specifically choose that. I'm just choosing the work center. Or conversely, down below, I've actually chosen a very specific machine center to work on, because this actually happens to be a long version of it, right? So this is has a long bracket, and that long bracket only runs on these 10-foot presses, or press brakes, right? So I've explicitly said this is my preferred machine for that particular thing. We'll see how that works. So that's what we've got. We've got this item that we've created with subcomponents and all that routing information and everything else. And then what we've done is we've gone in and, through a forecast, we've created a bunch of planned orders. So we entered a production forecast and ran MRP, and it generated all these production orders with, various due dates and everything else. And this isn't that unrealistic. this is what you'll see in real life, right? You'll go out, you'll have a forecast, weekly forecast, so everything ends up with the same due date on that forecast for that week or that month. Or, you've got salespeople entering sales orders. And I haven't seen an organization yet that they enter dates correctly. So if they get a whack load of orders in on Friday afternoon, guess what that ship date is going to be? It's going to be Friday afternoon. And so all your due dates are going to be Friday, even though you got a 2-week manufacturing lead time or something like that. Anyway, so these dates, they're all going to be sort of lumped together. So these production orders that were created, that, Business Central has gone out and, in air quotes, scheduled those production orders, right? So it's backward scheduled them from the due date and figured out what we actually need to execute on the shop floor. But you're on this call because you know that's not sufficient. So let's see what that looks like from a graphical perspective. So I'm going to open up this graphical scheduler here. This is the free tool that's available on AppSource. You can install that anytime. And when I open this up, I've got a view set up. You can create whatever views you like in the system, right? So there's a whole bunch of different views here. But the view I've set up, I've set some color rules and things like that up on this. And this just shows me sort of the load and the allocation on each work center. So we've got the work centers and the machine centers underneath it. And blue just means it's good. Orange means there's nothing scheduled on it. And if we scroll down, red means it's overloaded. So you can see what Business Central has done, and it's pretty cruddy, right? If I look at welding as an example, like here's my welding work center because my routing said, schedule at the work center level. And what it's done is it's just put everything on that work center, even though I want to schedule it at the individual welding stations. Right, so it's just dumped this on. Well, this is not an executable schedule. It might give me sort of an order of go, like a rough sequence to work in, but I have no idea how long this is going to take or what resources I need or anything else, right? So really, Business Central hasn't scheduled anything. It's just done, junk, really. Ultimately, this is not useful for anything. So the graphical scheduler here, in this view, just shows me the standard Business Central stuff. Well, I can't do this. Well, if up until today you've gone, oh, well, here's my schedule, I'm going to drag and drop these 100 different operations to schedule it the way I think it should be done. Well, who wants to do that? I don't want to do that. This is 100 operations. What if I have 1,000 operations? You're not going to drag and drop stuff. So you get all mad and say, this is junk. So what do you do instead? Well, you go up and you hit this generate production schedule. And I'm not going to talk too much about these options yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate my schedule for tomorrow morning. So my morning shift starting tomorrow, that's when I want to schedule for. And there's a bunch of options you can set here, different rules and all sorts of things you can do. This filter here allows us to filter, maybe I just want to schedule my planned production orders or my firm plan or my released or whatever you can, or specific parts, you can set all those filters. But I'm going to hit generate schedule here, and it's going to go out and it's going to actually generate the schedule. And 90% of this time is actually just the data transmission to the scheduling engine that lives on the cloud and back into Business Central. But that was it. I ran that, it took 10 seconds, and it scheduled all my production orders. Now this view that it shows us is the result list. So I've got a whole bunch of different schedules I've run since the beginning of time. I've got an active one here that I'm working with that's bold. But this allows us to do sort of what if scenarios, right? I can run a schedule and go, wow, I ended up with a whole bunch of late orders. Let me see what happens if I subcontract some stuff or if I move things around, and I can compare, what's late, what's early, and decide which schedule I actually want to, execute. Now, so this list gives us this. There's a setting that allows you to launch this view or launch the schedule details or run a code unit or automatically commit the schedule back into Business Central. But I'm going to open up the detailed schedule results here. And this is actually the schedule that we just generated. Now you're going, well, that doesn't mean anything. But what it's telling us is it's showing us, all the machines that it got scheduled on, all the operations, the start times, the end times for the schedule, basically, similar to what you'd see on the production order routing lines, with a few additional things, right? Like, again, there's the lot splitting. So if we'd split up these lots, we could see that. We can see, sort of status of what's going on and a whole bunch of different things, like if, product is being moved from one machine to another, a whole bunch of stuff. And by the way, in here's where I always like talking about hotkeys, but let's say I wanted to come in here and I wanted to see everything that we're doing on the laser work center. Well, I can just click on that, hit Alt F3, and I can filter on that. If you didn't know, Alt F3 works the same way in the web client as the rotator client. You can hit Alt F3 to go out and filter on individual cells like that. And if you hit Shift Control F12, you get into sort of the focus view, which also gives me that filter pane. So there you go, some hotkeys. Okay, but we don't really care about that. I'm getting myself all excited by hotkeys here. What we care about is the fact that we've got a schedule. We hit a button, 10 seconds later, we've got a schedule. Well, how do you know the schedule is any good? Well, number one, you can trust us, but I can also go in and look at that graphical scheduler again. And this time it's opening up a view to show me the MxAPS orders. So what this does is now shows me the schedule that MX has generated. Okay, so a couple of things on here, the colors. This purple, you can, again, set whatever color rules you want, but this purple here, or magenta, or whatever it is, that's my setup segment. So this is a segment of this production. So that's setup, and green is my runtime. And like I mentioned before, we can have multiple segments on any of these things. So you could actually have a couple different segments for setup, right? One for tooling change, one for color change, or whatever, and we can eliminate some of that setup time depending on how we group those parts. We could also have, cool down time and move time and all sorts of segments following the runtime. So we can schedule really, Business Central kind of has 5 segments, if you will, that are kind of, not that great. They've got setup, runtime, move time, wait time, and then technically queue time on the work center. We can schedule all of that on here as well. Okay, anyway, so that's the colors. And then if I scroll down a little bit, well, let me show you a couple things. So you can see here that, in the welding, it's actually chosen the appropriate, welding stations to run that work on. So even though Business Central had just put it on the welding area, we've chosen the appropriate machines to run that on. And same thing up here. If I scroll up, we can see that on the lasers, it's chosen, the appropriate laser to run those particular parts on. Now, another thing I'll mention here real quick is if you look at this shear here, we've got, I mentioned earlier, the aluminum parts and the stainless steel parts. Well, we've got a sequencing rule set up to do our aluminum stuff first and then our stainless steel first. And maybe that's not realistic or real, but we can do that type of sequencing, right? So here you can see this AL means it's aluminum. So I've run AL here, here's another AL, aluminum. So we keep running aluminum all the way up to here, and then we start running stainless steel. And then we run all our stainless steel, and then we come back and we start running aluminum again. So we've got that ability to sequence that product as well. And through that sequencing, you can use that to also eliminate that setup, right? So if I'm running all the aluminum parts together, maybe that results in less setup or alternate setup and things like that. The other thing, well, actually, that's good for sequencing. I won't get into that too much. Now, let's have a look at, the laser here. So you notice on here, we've got this thing that's a long and we've got short. So we've got long brackets and short brackets that are being cut on the laser. And after we cut it on the laser, we move it over to the press brake. And because this is a long item, right, so that's a long bracket, it has to run on the 10-foot press brake. So that's what it does. We run it here and it goes over to the 10-foot press brake and away we go. But you'll notice on this one here, this says short. Well, why does it say short? Well, we can also run short items on this long press brake if we want. And the reason it chose this long press brake instead of the short one is because the long press brake is faster, or it's our preferred machine. So it chose that because it could. But now we have a problem here because you notice this guy says long. Well, when this one finishes at the end, the long press brake is already in use. So the scheduling engine has a couple of choices here. It could run this and then wait an hour until the long press brake is in use, or sorry, no longer in use, and schedule it after this. But that means this thing is going to wait an hour. And in the meantime, this one up here has to go somewhere. So it could go on the short, but the short isn't as good and all sorts of stuff. So what it did instead of putting it on the 90-ton press brake, what it did was it actually chose an alternate machine. It chose this 120-ton. It decided that even though there's potential penalties on this larger machine, like maybe it takes more to set up, maybe there's more move time to get to it because it's the other side of the facility, or maybe it's more expensive to run. Even with all those penalties that we've applied to this, it's chosen this because it results in a better schedule. And here it chose this particular, press brake because it's internal and everything, like it's in our facility. But if I didn't have this, we could also have it choose a subcontract instead. So instead of choosing another machine in our facility, it could decide, even though subcontract is more expensive or takes longer or whatever, I'm going to go out and subcontract this operation instead because it makes more sense. And you can do things like say, we only want to subcontract if we've got 10 orders that we can do in a subcontract or whatever. So we're not, shipping, paying shipping and everything for one order at a time. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do there. So anyway, that's some of the machine center selection. So it's intelligently coming in, selecting the best machine to use. If that machine isn't, the preferred machine isn't available, it can go out and look at alternate machines to use and everything else. And you can see it at this point, it decided that, you know what, for this particular one, I've got no choice. I'm going to run it on the 6 foot, because that makes the most sense, even though it's slower or whatever, the reasons are that we don't use it normally. It's not a preferred machine. So that's some of the intelligent machine center selection. And it's doing this to get a schedule that is really as tight as possible. Okay, and I'll show you the scheduling rules in a bit. We can change how we schedule, like it doesn't have to be by due date or any of those sorts of things. Okay, now the other thing I'll mention while we're here is, I mean, all of this stuff is basically the same, but these guys here, I haven't turned on color rules for this powder coat line. And that's to illustrate that this is actually what we call an infinite capacity machine. So what that means is, you can see we've got 3 production orders scheduled one on top of another, right? So this isn't, constraining it by my capacity on this particular machine. And so why would you do that? And one of the reasons is subcontract. I don't care what the subcontractor capacity is. They say it takes a week for, for turnaround. I'm going to schedule that operation for a week, and I'm going to send it to them, and I could have 100 operations scheduled on that subcontractor, and I don't really care. They're going to get it back to me, hopefully, within that time frame. The other use for this is sort of a what if scenario, right? So if you, sort of follow theory of constraints and all that kind of stuff, I might have a bottleneck on this powder coat line. Maybe this powder coat line is an internal, area within my facility, and MX can tell you if it's a bottleneck or not. It can tell you, yeah, you've got high utilization and high queue time. You've got a bottleneck situation at that machine. And so that's going to impact my schedule, right? It's going to make things late. It's going to, reduce my throughput, all that kind of stuff. So what do I do about that? Do I add another shift? Do I outsource? How do I address that? Well, MX can answer those questions for you, because what I can do is I can turn off the capacity constraints on that machine and say, what is the actual capacity I need in order to get my throughput on the schedule? And it'll go in and it'll tell you, look, this is what you need, right? And you wouldn't probably do it off the chart. You do it off the tabular data that we collect. And it'll tell you, yeah, you're overloaded by X% or whatever. And you can decide, yeah, I'll outsource, or I'll start a second shift, or I'll do whatever I want. So that happens a lot, right? I've got a bottleneck in packaging or whatever. Well, do I add a person? Do I add another line? What do I do? I don't know, right? How would you answer that? You'd have somebody stand there and watch them for a day to figure out what you can do. MX can answer that question for you a month in advance if you like. Okay, anyway, enough about bottlenecks and analysis. The rest of this is pretty straightforward, right? I hit a button, 10 seconds later, I've got a schedule that I can actually go out and send to the shop floor and have them execute on. Okay. Now, when I want to do that, basically what I would do after I've run the schedule, I can, pop open that chart if I want to review it, or I just have to come in and look at the stats and go, yeah, everything looks good. I just hit commit. And what that'll do is it'll push all the start and end times and everything else into Business Central, and those production orders will now be updated. I can firm plan them or release them or do whatever I need to get them out to the shop floor. So that's it. Now, again, I don't even have to see any of these results. I can set it up when I go into the setup to actually just automatically commit the schedule. I can just run it and it commits it. So I can put it in a job queue to just automatically run the schedule and update Business Central with the dates, and I'm good to go. So let's actually have a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go into, the MX setup. I'm just going to actually zoom in here a little bit. So there's a bunch of stuff you can set up here. All of this, for the most part, when you run the assisted setup wizard, gets put in automatically. But I will just mention a couple of things here. So the one that I mentioned was what happens after you run the schedule. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do. So you can actually go in and have it automatically commit the schedule, or just pop up and show the Gantt chart for you, the scheduler for you, and those sorts of things, right? So you've got that choice. And then the other thing I'll mention is this order priority, which I'm going to get into in a sec. This is sort of the default, but we do have the ability to set priorities on orders. And the default, if you don't do anything special, is going to be this 5 here. You can manually change that on a per order basis, but where that's useful is I've got a customer that I always want to give priority scheduling to. So I can always prioritize that customer's orders. And you could create a little extension that sets that priority for that specific customer. Or maybe I'm doing a campaign, right? I want to make sure all these items that I've got on my campaign get done first so that I'm meeting my delivery expectations or whatever. So there's lots of ways you can mess with this default priority. And where that comes into play, if I come in here and we look at the scheduling rules, this is actually what decides how we schedule the system. So we've just got one default one here called rule 1, and I'm going to come in and have a look at what this thing says. So just some questions popping up there that caught my eye. So this is basically how we define how the system is going to sequence the order. So what it's going to place priority on when it runs the schedule. And so the first thing we've got here is the priority. So that's the first thing it's going to look at. If you don't do anything, everything's going to have the same priority, and that's just going to be the same. Then it's going to look at the due date. So it's going to try and schedule based on due date first. That's going to be the highest weighted attribute that it's looking at to decide what to schedule. And then we've got this user 1 field here, and that's actually defines whether it's aluminum or stainless steel. So it uses that to sequence by type, and then order number and a bunch of other things. So in here, I've got a lot of things that I can choose to sequence by or schedule by, right? A whole bunch of the user fields and everything else, but all sorts of things that you can do here to decide how you want to schedule that. And then on top of that, we have the ability to do different, essentially, waveforms or rule logic here on how we do it. So here we've got, priority, we've got ascending. Let's say this user 1 here, for fun, maybe this is color. So I can do a sawtooth, right? So that's the example I used before, where I go from light to dark, and then when I get to dark, I want to start back at light. So it's a sawtooth, right? We ramp up, and when we get to the dark, and I need to start over, we got to flush everything and start back at light. And if you really want to get fancy, we could set it up so that after we finish the dark and we switch back to light, we could schedule some additional time on that, machine center or work center, to flush it or clean it or whatever else. Okay, so that's that. And then we've got the triangle. So this is good if you're running a furnace or something like that, right? You want to start with the colder stuff first and ramp up to the hottest, and then ramp back down to the coldest parts, right? So if you're doing heat treating and things like that, that would be good, or casting or whatever you're doing. So there's a whole bunch of different things we can choose here in addition to, the various parameters that we can define these rules on. And the nice thing about these rules is we can actually do this by work cell. So what that allows us to do is say, hey, I've got one part of the facility that runs this way. Maybe I do have a furnace or something like that where I want to order by heat requirements or everything else. And another part on packaging, I want to focus on due date or whatever, right? So we can control these rules based on production cell. Okay, so that's the basics of the rules. The segments I talked about a little bit already, but let me just bring up the segments here. So again, you can come in here and I can define as many segments as I like, right? So I could have, I've got one called setup, but I could have, tooling change and color change or whatever. And again, I can do that variable setup reduction. So I can eliminate portions of that setup instead of just having to rely on eliminating an entire setup, which is not always possible. Okay. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about here on the setup is this alternate groups. And again, what this allows us to do, so, you saw in the welding there where I schedule everything on the welding work center and it chose the appropriate machine center automatically. And then when we're on the lasers, it chose a different press brake depending on what it thought was best. And this is how we define those alternates. So I'll show you on the routing, I scheduled some of those parts to run on a specific machine, but if it couldn't run it on that machine for any reason, it could choose one of the alternates that we've defined here. right? So here I've got this 12-foot press brake. So that's the example you saw on the chart. It couldn't schedule it on the normal 10-foot. So it went out to the 120 ton and scheduled on that instead, because I said it was allowed to do that. And on here, I could set various preferences, right? I could put a weighting on that so that I can say this is going to hurt if I use this machine, and to what extent it will hurt. And I can also say, don't do that unless I have a certain quantity. So that's again good for subcontracting, right? So I could come in here and just as easily, I could say, you know what? Another alternate to this is doing subcontracting. And I don't want to subcontract unless I have 10 orders. And I want to set, a preference here that's going to hurt if I do the subcontracting. And I can also change this and say if I subcontracting, it takes 10 times the amount of time to get it back. And based on this, it might choose subcontract in the right circumstances. It might say, you know what, it makes a lot more sense to subcontract versus using one of these other things. Okay? And it makes those decisions for you all automatically. Okay, so that's the basic setup. Now, setup is really easy, right? If you install this thing, you run the assisted setup and don't do anything else, like don't touch another thing, you're going to get finite capacity scheduling to your existing shift patterns, and it's going to do the automatic machine center selection for you, right? So that's it. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to do anything I've shown you here. It'll basically run that schedule on your existing data. Now, of course, you have to have your routing scheduled to the work centers and all those sorts of things. If you want it to do the automatic machine center selection, if you don't have machine centers, no problem. It'll schedule to the work center. It'll do all that kind of good stuff for you automatically. If you want to get fancy, you can come in here and maybe create some alternate groups to choose alternate machines if your preferred machine is not there. But most of it, you don't have to touch. Okay, so setup is very easy. Now let's actually have a look at the routing. So after I've done the setup and everything else, I actually want to go in there and see what we add from an order specific perspective or product specific perspective to see what we do. So I'm going to open up this long bracket here, and we'll have a look at what that thing does. So fairly straightforward, right? So I've got two operations on this particular component. And really all it does is, the first one goes off to the laser, and again, scheduled to the work center, but it'll choose the appropriate machine center for it. And here we say the preferred machine to schedule this on is that 10-foot press brake, right? And over here is all the normal Business Central stuff that you fill in. And right about here, we start getting into the MX specific configuration. And what I've said is we want to make machine centers, alternate machine centers active. And here's all the machine centers that I can use in place of that preferred one. And this is just that thing I just showed you, where at this point now I can actually choose subcontract or the 12-foot. Okay, so again, if it can't find that preferred one, it's going to use this. There's a whole bunch of other things. I'm not going to get into these in a lot of detail, but this allow breaks is kind of good because there's lots of environments where if I start an operation, I can't stop it, right? Like heat treat is a good example. I'm not going to, turn on the oven and then, my shift ends, so I'm going to turn it off and then come back tomorrow and turn it back on. You can't do that. Or if I'm, doing extrusion or something like that, I'm not going to stop the extrusion line and, start it up tomorrow. There's too much waste. So this allows us to say we're not going to schedule anything if that's going to result in that operation having to be paused and restarted. Okay, just in time, we've actually got, we basically backwards scheduling. That's this just in time thing, so we can schedule things, as close to the due date as possible. Not often used, but it's there. We can also say, you know what, I'm not allowed to schedule anything if it's going to be a certain number of days early or a certain number of days late, right? So this can be handy if you've got perishable stuff. I don't want to run, some product if I'm going to, finish it 3 weeks before I have to ship it, and the expiration date on it is 3 weeks. That's not good. So you can set things like that. A whole bunch of other stuff. These are interesting capabilities here. Where we can insert lower priority orders onto a machine when, a higher priority order leaves a hole on it. Anyway, lots of good stuff. All sorts of order grouping and all sorts of things. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, the lots. So this is a good one, right? Again, if I have to build 20,000 items, I can say, you know what, I want to only do it in, lots of 500 at a time. And so that order, let's say I've got an order for 1,000 items and I break it up into 1,000-piece lots, it's actually going to do the equivalent of creating 10 production orders. It doesn't create production orders. It's going to create 10 lots within the schedule, and it can schedule those on independent machines or whatever you like. Okay, so, or I can just say, you know what, every time I do this, I want to break it up into 5 lots. And if my order is for 20,000, I get 5 lots. And if it's for 100, I get 5 lots. And again, it can then choose the right machines to schedule it on. It could even outsource some of that lots, right? If I've got an order for 20,000 broken up into 1,000-piece lots, it might decide 3 of those lots need to be outsourced, or they need to go on a different machine, or whatever else you do. And then a whole bunch of other stuff. This multi-part tool is kind of neat. At one point, we had Haas CNC. So if you're into machining, Haas CNC is a pretty good name on sort of the mid-range and lower-end CNC machines and stuff. And they had machines that would work on one pallet at a time, right? And each face on that pallet could hold a different part. So we can turn that on where it runs 5 different parts on the same machine, and they start and finish at the same time. Anyway, there's lots of good stuff you can do there. Again, we can model almost any process that you have within the system. But just like I said with setup, you actually don't need to come in here and do any of this stuff if you don't want. It's all there for that advanced modeling and that advanced scheduling. Most of the time, what people are going to rely on is setting up, just the automatic machine center selection, the alternate groups, and away you go. Now, again, for the on-prem version, we have the advanced constraints where we can also link labor, material, tooling, all of that to individual operations. That's a couple months away in the cloud version, but if you need that desperately today, we do have it. It's just in the on-prem version. And the on-prem version, anyway, I'll leave it at that. So yes, we can do all of that kind of additional constraints and everything else. So that's really it. That's all we do, right? So again, just to recap everything, Business Central runs and gives me junk, right? This is useless. I'd sit here for a day dragging and dropping stuff to schedule it the way I like. Nobody wants to do that. So instead of that, I come in here and I say, you know what, schedule this for tomorrow morning shift. I hit generate schedule. I wait. Now, if you have, 5,000 orders or something, that's going to take a few minutes to generate. On the 40 orders I've got here, it's 10, 15 seconds to generate it. It doesn't matter how many orders you have. This is way faster than Business Central's MRP. I come in and I either commit the results right now, or maybe I want to look at the results first and compare them or whatever else, and I'm done. So it takes a process that would normally take a day or more or several days, and it automatically does it for me in a couple of clicks, and I'm good to go. Okay. All right. So that's basically it. On the thing, and there's a whole bunch of questions. I don't know which have been answered yet, but I'll have a look at those in a sec. We're just going to go back into the PowerPoint for a bit and talk about what this thing is going to cost you. So first of all, a little bit on what you can save, right? So I talked about the time savings on the production planner and not needing a rocket scientist to do your production planning. It's all magic once you've got it set up. But these are some real results that customers have seen, right? Massive increase in throughput, and you can logically see how that's capable once you see how it generates a schedule. And the labor hours, right? I mean, we're really optimizing, for lack of a better term, what happens out on the shop floor. A whole bunch of stuff. I talked about the setup and queue time there. Again, that queue time is interesting because in Business Central, it's sort of a static number you put on the work center. MX calculates that queue time dynamically, so you know how heavily loaded a machine center is it a bottleneck, whatever, and you can manage that proactively. The working capital, blah, 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 all this good stuff. Again, estimated freight costs, you know exactly when something is going to run with a high degree of confidence, and you can plan your inbound and outbound freight based on that schedule, right? So a whole bunch of good stuff that it can do. So what does all that cost you? Way too little is what it costs you, I'll tell you that. So first of all, go to the next slide already. All right, so the way we price it today is based on the number of production orders that you schedule, and that's per company, right? So if you're a partner, you've seen the price list, and you're wondering, at that price, is that what I showed you? Is that really what you get? Yes, it is. So everything I showed you today is what's on that price list. So The way it works is if you choose, if you're a small company and you want to schedule 75 production orders at a time, that's going to cost you 150 bucks a month. That's it. And it goes up from there, right? But it's still significantly, well, it's too low. But anyway, the pricing will go up in 2022. But what will happen is if I try and run the schedule and I've got more than 75 active production orders, I'm going to get an error. Okay, so I think the tiers are 75 and then 200 and then 1,000 or something like that. And then if you want those advanced constraints, so that's the labor, material, setup production, all those sorts of things, that's going to add 25% to that cost. So if you're a smaller organization, or if you only have 75 active production orders at any time, it's 190 bucks a month, and you get everything that I just showed you. Okay, and then if you want the on-prem version, that's a completely different price list, and it's we'll discuss that because it gives you some additional capabilities that the cloud one doesn't, but that's a different price list. But for anything Business Central, that the price list that the partners that you have, that's what you're going to pay. All right, so that's basically it. Now, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact us on the website, or contact your partner if you want to find out what it's going to cost you. We do have a number of upcoming events. There's questions there on Shop Floor Insight. You don't need Shop Floor Insight to run MX, but you do need to report production, before you run the schedule, right? So if I work for a day and I do a whole bunch of output and record a whole bunch of time, and I don't enter that into Business Central and I rerun my schedule, obviously it's going to think nothing's been done, and it's just going to reschedule stuff that's already complete. So before you run a schedule, you need to get those shop floor updates in place. And that's why Shop Floor Insight or tools like that are useful, because then it's all real time. As I'm working in the shop floor, it's updating Business Central. And so when we run the schedule, we know what we're dealing with. Okay. Let's see what else here. Okay, and other upcoming events. So the shop floor would be worth looking at. We also have recordings of that. If you just want to go and see what shop floor does, you can look at that. We will be sending out a copy of this recording. I don't think this will be published online, but if for all the attendees, you'll get a copy of this recording. And then you can go to the knowledge base for additional information. I don't believe the MX documentation is quite published yet, but it will be available on the knowledge base as well. And you can go check out the website for MX. All right, so now we got a whole whack load of questions here. Let me jump over to those and see if I can answer some of them. Yes, so there's a question on if you have a burning table, a plasma cutter, and you're nesting multiple production orders simultaneously, you can do that. So that's order set, or probably an order set. Anyway, yes, short answer is yes, you can do that. You can run multiple items together. And when I talked about that multi-part tool setting on the routing, it's sort of like that. That's not the exact setting you'd use, but it's sort of like that, where you can group those items together on the same machine, even though they're different parts or different production orders or whatever else. So there's a question on some scheduling rules. Hopefully I answered that. I didn't talk about those in a great deal of detail, but like total cycle time and things like that, you can define a scheduling rule for that. Concurrent capacities, there's a question on that. So yes, you can set up concurrent capacities, and it will basically just, if I'm not mistaken, just divide the time out for that operation across those capacities, because you got one machine center or work center that's not divided into multiple machines, and it can look at that, and it just basically divides the time by the concurrent capacities. Let's see, and there's another question really on order grouping, and yes, you can do that. We call it order sets. So if you have a sales order with multiple items on the same sales order and you want them to kind of move through the shop together, we can kind of group those together. There may be some intricacies there where you have to talk to us about how that works. And actually, that's a good point. Implementation, if you want something very simple, like you don't need any of the setups or any of the advanced modeling or anything else. You saw how easy it was to get it set up and working. But if you do need more, you can engage us to do that work. And people say, well, what does that cost? We have fixed price implementation plans on almost all the other products. For MX, it's different, because we come in, we do a discovery first. Based on that, we'll figure out what the implementation time is going to be. And it could be anywhere from few days to a week to a few months, right? When we did Rolls-Royce Energy, I think that was a 6 or 8 month implementation. So it can vary a lot, is what I'm saying, okay, for implementation. And if you need some of the advanced stuff, we'll get somebody in there to do that discovery and figure out what it's actually going to take and plan it out that way. Okay, so there's a long question here on operators. And yes, you can have fractional labor assigned to machines. So I think the question there is, I've got one operator running 5 machines, and there's no way they could run a 6. So I want to only allow 5 machines to run with one operator. You can do that as well if you like. And there's a question on, can you schedule this thing to run? And yes, you can. So we've got customers running on Nav. They schedule, I think it's 2 or 3 times a day, right? They run 30,000 orders a week. Again, they're not going to sit there and go through Nav and figure out what the heck the schedule is. They just have it run, and it's immediately presented in Shop Floor Insight for them to start recording their actuals against that schedule. So yes, you can set it up to schedule periodically and automatically update the schedule as you go. And you can run it locked and unlocked. So if you've already started stuff on a specific machine, or if it's already scheduled on a machine, or you've manually moved it to a new machine, it'll respect that, and it won't reschedule stuff that's already in progress. It's only going to schedule things that haven't yet been started. And if you run it locked, or any of those changes, it can leave the schedule as it is, and it's not locked, but this is the sort of parameter-based scheduling or the net change scheduling. It can schedule around what's already scheduled in the shop floor. I wouldn't do it every 30 minutes or so. It's usually done once per shift is what you run the schedule, so you don't get a lot of volatility in your schedule. You run it in the morning and in the evening, or every morning, or whatever, right? Because again, we can schedule out 30 days very accurately. You don't have to necessarily reschedule every few hours. There are no other prerequisites for MX. All you need is Business Central Cloud or on-prem. If you want to run Nav or Business Central on-prem where you're running SQL, we've got the on-prem version that you can use as well. So this does work with Nav. You just won't get the version I showed you. It's slightly different, but it's a Windows application, but you can run it on-prem as well. But there's no other prerequisites for it whatsoever. There is a freeze time frame as well to like a fence that you can set up to schedule, like to lock in the first 3 days or the next 3 days, and then reschedule everything after that. We also have resource fences, which means that, if I don't have material now, I know the lead time of that material. And so I won't schedule, even though I don't have any replenishment coming in, I can schedule the order, but I'll only schedule it after the lead time of the components that I need, right? So when we get that advanced constraints in, it will look at that type of information. And so yes, we do have that fence based both on locking orders for a specific time frame, and also the fence for the components and labor and everything else. Okay, so there's a question on not using work centers and only using resources. You would at least need some kind of work center defined. It could be an infinite capacity work center that we can constrain against. Like, we wouldn't constrain against capacity, but we need something to, some kind of machine or work center to schedule on. So you'd have to have at least a dummy work center. And then yes, you could schedule, constrain based on your labor or whatever other tooling that you have. And that again, for the cloud version, that'll be more like August when you can do that. If it's on-prem, you can do that right this very minute if you like. Let's say the algorithms, it's asking if the original due date is recommended by the planning engine or respected. So yeah, if you lock that order, then yes, it can force that due date to be held, but you typically don't want to do that, right? If the order hasn't been started, you want that to be, as dynamic as possible. So it's telling you, this is a little different, right? You're not saying, this is the, well, actually, I should back up. But anyway, it's not saying, this is the due date and you have to respect that. And by respecting that, it means I have to start in the past. Well, it's not going to do that. It's not going to say, you can start in the past to meet this due date. It's going to say, starting today, this is what you're going to end that schedule at. And the one annoyance that I always have with Business Central is, they tie the end date of the schedule to the due date on the production order. That drives me nuts. Well, the due date is the due date. It's not the same as the scheduling end date. So yeah, we do track the schedule end date independently of the due date. And we can tell you, That's why we have on that screen, it'll tell you if you've got late orders, because we know what the due date is and we know when the schedule is going to end. They're independent. So what will happen is it'll schedule it and it'll say the schedule end date is, July 5th and my due date was July 1st. It's going to show up as a late order. And then I can decide what I'm going to do about that. Do I now outsource that? Do I run a second shift? Do I phone the customer? Do I change the priority on that particular order so it schedules it earlier? And then I run another schedule without committing it to Business Central, and I run another schedule to see what orders became late due to my priority change. So you can do all of those sort of what if things as well, right? All right, that was a longer answer than the question warranted, but I got excited. Okay, and there's a question about partners in Australia. We do have some. You can also contact us if you have questions. If your existing partner is not one of our resellers, we have 3 or 4 in Australia, but give us a shout and we'll be able to help you out. And then, yes, there's a question on infinite capacity. Absolutely. You can set machines up to be infinite capacity, and you can also run it in infinite capacity mode. So instead of changing each individual work center or machine center to infinite, you can just run it as infinite capacity, and it will basically schedule us. There's no constraints. Okay. And yes, can planning be restricted to release production orders only? You sure can. So let me jump in and show you some of that. So when I generate that schedule, in here, this filter, if I only want to do released production orders, I can come in here and filter on anything I like on that production order routing line. So if I just want to schedule released, I can. But again, if we're doing planned orders, I can schedule this and I can see the impact of any of my planned orders from MRP on my existing released orders out there, right? I probably want to do all of them. So what that'll do is allow me to go in and say, okay, I've got my existing released order schedule. What are my planned orders going to do to my schedule? What's it going to push late? What's it going to make early? All of those sorts of things, right? So you can set that all up. Okay. And there's a question on the already planned orders not to be rescheduled. So again, you may or may not want to do that, but you can lock the existing scheduled orders in place and it'll only reschedule new ones. Or you can set up that fence where it says, the next 3 days, lock that schedule and just schedule, reschedule everything after 3 days, right? So you want some consistency in the schedule that you release. You don't want the schedule changing every time you run it because something happened necessarily, right? Sometimes you do, like machine goes down, you want to reschedule and have it redo everything, but quite often you just want to reschedule the orders on that specific machine and things like that. So yes, you have that capability to decide what gets rescheduled and what doesn't. Okay. And again, yeah, so there's another question on that. It won't reschedule anything that's in progress, right? So if it's in progress on a machine, it's scheduled on, laser cutter 1, tomorrow it's not going to schedule on laser cutter 2. It's already in progress on one machine. It's going to tell you to move it off to a different machine after it's started. Okay. All right. So hopefully that answers all of the questions. I don't think there's anything else coming in. So again, very easy to use system, very capable, lots of capabilities. Just babbling now. The graphical scheduler there, if you don't want to jump into the fully automated scheduling, grab that guy and you can do manual scheduling, drag and drop. It's completely free. Or jump into MxAPS to eliminate the need to ever really look at a graphical scheduler again. All right. With that, let me bring this up. And our marketing people always tell me to make sure you follow us on YouTube and all that. So when there's new videos that pop up, you'll get a notification and you can watch those things and everything else. If you have any questions, let us know. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody. Hope you all have a great rest of the week. And hopefully we'll be talking again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great content.